You're Rick fucking Dalton. Don't you forget it.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was written and directed by Quentin Tarantino, whose movies range from masterpieces to forgettable, but are always rich with things to talk about. His casual conversation dialogue, his humor, his imitation of genre cult classics, his swearing, his violence, his creepy interests, all of it makes even his worst films better than some generic assembly line movie, if you ask me. So is his newest film one of his good ones or one of his bad ones? Once Upon a Time in Hollywood follows about half a year in the life of fictional actor Rick Dalton, who is trying to keep a distinguished career going even though his star is fading. His stuntman Cliff Booth, who's happy to just get by, and a few real-life people, most prominently Sharon Tate. As they go about their daily lives in the glamour of 1960s Hollywood, they come into contact with a few unsettling, suspicious characters lurking around the city. I put a spoiler warning in the title, but more than most movies, I recommend you see this one without knowing much more about it. If there's one thing you should know, it's that Sharon Tate was one of the victims of the Charles Manson family murders. I'm going to spoil essentially everything now. Rick Dalton is one of Leonardo DiCaprio's best roles, right up there with Calvin Candy from Django Unchained, Frank from Catch Me If You Can, and Josh from Critters 3, I guess. He's a stuttering, self-conscious hick who cries when a little girl makes him look foolish and can't take care of his own house, but who has to pretend to be the toughest, most capable man in the world in nearly all his roles on TV and in movies. It kind of parallels DiCaprio's actual career, since after Romeo and Juliet and Titanic, he was perceived by a bunch of idiot boys and young men, like me, to be a talentless pretty boy, and he had to prove himself by being in some of the best, most hilariously masculine movies of all time since then. Rick's pain is played for laughs far more than it's played for drama. He's rich and has a clear fallback career path even if he doesn't become a big movie star. He has the best friend in the world and has no clue how good he has it, but he is still a kind man who only wants to be the best he can be at his profession, so you do want him to succeed more than you want him to realize how pathetic he is. Which he never really does, although he does get humble and take some quick paychecks making awful low-budget Italian movies. Tarantino might be the only person who likes terrible Italian movies more than I do. Cliff Booth is the coolest guy ever, and I mean 100% self-insert power fantasy Gary Stu type character here. He makes John Wick look flawed. If Brie Larson played this character, the internet would never shut up about it. But me, I like Gary Stu's if they're used well. John Wick is actually a good example of another that I like. While Cliff sort of becomes the protagonist during the final few scenes of the movie, he spends most of the movie as the secondary lead to DiCaprio. Cliff's a guy who effortlessly is everything Rick Dalton pretends to be in his roles. Not just cool, calm, collected, and a talented fighter, but possibly a cold-hearted murderer as well. I know some people felt that it was disrespectful to Bruce Lee to have him get humiliated by a self-insert power fantasy character, but I was more bothered by the fact that the possible murder of Cliff's wife was just played for laughs. But hey, it's Tarantino. The juxtaposition of on-screen events with an unfitting tone is one of his trademarks, and I'd be upset if there wasn't any of that in the movie. Cliff spends the whole movie wearing sunglasses, Hawaiian shirts, and cool shoes. He drives amazing cars. He respectfully declines the advances of hot hippie girls. He has a well-trained dog, a weight bench in his front yard, and a loop in his tool belt for a beer can. Every scene focusing on him makes you laugh at how exaggerated the character is. Still, he's possibly a murderer, and even more so than Rick reminds us that we shouldn't idolize people for a few superficial traits. Sharon Tate's portrayal was the subject of another of the movie's controversies. After all, if the movie's building up to a real-life event in which she was brutally murdered, why does she do almost nothing? Why isn't the movie about her as opposed to being about two made-up people? Well, aside from the plot of the movie taking a turn that makes Rick and Cliff the central figures of this movie's version of the Manson family home invasion, I think we're meant to be just casual observers of a few regular days of her life. I spent the whole movie dreading what I thought would be inevitable, her youthful optimism as she enjoys life and a promising career ahead of her crushed by a brutal murder. But that didn't happen. As a result, we see her as just a normal person, not a victim as we have to remember her now. Just as Rick reminds us that actors are often nothing like the characters they play, Margot Robbie's Sharon Tate reminds us that people only remembered for the tragedies they were involved in had entire lives and personalities of their own. I certainly wouldn't have had a problem with more dialogue or more screen time for her, but I felt that the amount used was effective. I was hoping to see more of Charles Manson in the film, but he only has a brief cameo. A lot of focus is spent on the Manson family, however. The individual murder hippies all have their own unique personalities and are all off-putting and creepy in different ways. Seeing them have violence inflicted upon them instead of seeing them commit acts of violence like in real life was unexpected and cathartic, not unlike the death of Hitler in Inglourious Bastards or the many slave owner deaths in Django Unchained. In fact, I hope Tarantino just keeps making movies where different awful people get it really bad. It's become a lot of fun. Still, they make up a new motivation for the Manson family. Now they think that violence depicted in movies and TV are responsible for real-life violence like the US military's actions in the Vietnam War, and they want to kill celebrities as revenge. In real life, Charles Manson believed that the Beatles were telling him to incite a race war with hidden meaning in the lyrics of the song Helter Skelter. Manson believed that a brutal murder of some rich white people would be blamed on black people, starting a race riot. Tarantino has never shied away from discussing race and racism before, and I have no idea why he chose to do that this time. Characters are nothing without a story, though, and this movie's story is set in the late 1960s. Just in in case you'd forget, there are constant songs from the era being played on the radio or on records, regular conversations about and name drops of movies, TV shows, and their directors and stars from that time, commercials and other advertisements for brands of the period, and hundreds upon hundreds of movie marquees, posters, signs, and more hammering it in. It's got as many 1960s things in it as Ready Player One had fiction things in it, only it's all used to give you an idea of what life was like in Hollywood back then. I think it may have gone a little overboard though. The movie is 2 hours and 45 minutes long, and while it certainly doesn't drag at any point, there are so many scenes of characters driving just so that they can play a song or a commercial on the radio, and the car can pass by a ton of billboards and signs to help set the mood again. Surely some of that could have been cut down. Another choice I don't really agree with is the constant flashbacks. It's not the amount of them exactly. Cutaway gags can be short and funny, and it wouldn't really matter how many you have in a movie if they are all that. But some of these cutaways last for minutes on end. In fact, I didn't really understand what the Bruce Lee cutaway was supposed to be. Did Cliff stop working on the roof, go to the set, then go back to the roof? Is he remembering what happened the last time he went on set? Is he imagining what would happen if he went now? I honestly don't know. Kurt Russell narrates part of the movie, but only very few parts of it, so it's always jarring when you hear him again, since every time you've already forgotten that he was doing narration. And Tarantino really needs to stop using his movies as an excuse to indulge in his foot fetish. It's not that seeing filthy feet is gross. It is, but that's not why I don't want it in the movie. It's that being aware of his fetish from having seen it in his earlier films just makes it distracting. The hippie girl shoves her feet right up against a car windshield inches from the camera. I couldn't tell you what happened for the next minute after that because my thought process immediately shifted from focusing on the conversation to, Tarantino doing his foot fetish thing again. Gross. Is this still going on? Why doesn't he just make a movie and then also make foot fetish videos? The cost would be negligible. How much money could he possibly save by doing them at the same time? What do the actresses think of this? Do they know? Do they care? I mean, if someone paid me money for something as uninvasive as seeing my feet, I'd be down for it, but doesn't it creep them out to work with a guy who openly lusts for them? Heck, I'd do it, I can't judge them, and if they're cool with Tarantino doing it, shouldn't I be? If I think about it any longer, what does that say about me? And it goes on like that for a while. I'm really tired of seeing it, it's nasty, and it's distracting. I wish he'd stop. So that's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, an alternate history fantasy of what might have happened if the coolest guy ever, and a guy who wishes he was, were the targets of the Manson family home invasion instead of the real-life victims who deserved a full life but never got it. It's funny, it's got entertaining characters that you either pity or envy or both, it's got an unpleasant amount of pointless foot fetish scenes, it's got hysterically brutal violence, and it's got 60s nostalgia. If you can stomach the gruesome ending, it's a must-watch for movie fans. It's easily my favorite film of the year so far, and I'm only a little ashamed to say that about something as obviously appealing to film dorks as a Tarantino movie. I'm unoriginal, what can I say? But this movie sure isn't. See it. Thanks for listening.